The day I found a fence blocking my lake access, I didn't scream. I didn't call the cops. I bought the land and the fence, and accidentally made the HOA Queen Karen pay for all of it. Let me tell you how the nosiest neighbor in town funded her own downfall. The sun scorched the suburban cul-de-sac with the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. Jake wiped his brow with a paint-smeared rag, his arms sore from spending the last 3 hours priming the last stretch of his backyard fence. The scent of fresh cedar and latex paint lingered thick in the air. It was the kind of day where no one should be outside, but Jake didn't have the luxury of waiting. This was the first free weekend he'd had in a month, and the fence had been on his to-do list for longer than he cared to admit. His brush moved in steady strokes, methodical, almost meditative. The neighborhood was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of lawnmowers in the distance and the occasional chirp of a bird too stubborn to hide in the shade. Jake felt good. Content maybe. Tired, but in a satisfying way. Then he heard it. Excuse. Me! The voice cracked through the stillness like a whip. Shrill, sharp, the kind of tone that was used to demanding obedience, not asking questions. Jake turned slowly, squinting against the glare. There she stood, framed by the open gate at the edge of his property. Visor, oversized sunglasses, and a frown so tight it could curdle milk. Karen. They weren't friends, acquaintances at best. She lived 2 houses down, her yard trimmed like a golf course, her porch plants arranged by height and color. Everything about her screamed curated perfection and judgment. That color, she said, marching a few steps in, pointing to his freshly painted fence like it was a crime scene. What exactly do you think you're doing? Jake blinked. Painting my fence? Karen's lips thinned. That's not the approved color scheme. There's an approved color scheme? For the HOA, yes. Beige, white, or light gray. That, she gestured dramatically, is charcoal. It's practically black. It makes the whole street look hostile. Jake rested his hand on the top rail of the fence, paintbrush still dripping. Karen, I'm not in the HOA. My house isn't part of it. This side of the street opted out years ago. Her mouth opened, then closed. A twitch of confusion crossed her face before it was quickly masked with smug certainty. Well, maybe not officially, but we all try to follow the guidelines. It's called community standards. Jake almost laughed, but stopped himself. I checked with the city when I moved in. This property isn't under HOA jurisdiction. I can paint the fence whatever color I want. Karen's nose wrinkled like she'd smelled something foul. That attitude is why this neighborhood is going downhill. He didn't rise to the bait. Karen, I'm just trying to enjoy my weekend. I'm not breaking any rules. Oh, you will be hearing from the HOA, she snapped. I have contacts on the board, and even if you're not a member, we can make things very uncomfortable for people who don't play by the rules. He tilted his head slightly, leveling his gaze with hers. You're threatening me because you don't like the color of my fence. Karen didn't answer. She turned, sharply, and stomped back through the gate, muttering under her breath. As she disappeared behind her meticulously trimmed hedges, Jake let out a slow exhale. The silence returned, but it felt heavier now. Unsettled. The next morning, Jake found a folded piece of paper shoved in his mailbox. No envelope, just a typed letterhead with HOA compliance notice printed in bold at the top. It claimed he was in violation of multiple neighborhood standards: fence color, lawn height, unapproved exterior modifications. At the bottom, a warning: failure to correct violations may result in fines or legal action. He stared at it for a long time. The letter wasn't signed. There was no contact information. Just a bold red first warning stamped across the bottom like a threat. Jake walked down the street later that day, asking neighbors about it. Some had received similar notices in the past, always unsigned, always vague. A few admitted Karen had started writing them after she was denied an official position on the HOA board years ago. She took it upon herself to enforce the rules anyway, self-appointing herself as some kind of neighborhood quality control. Jake chuckled dryly. It would have been funny if it wasn't so ridiculous, but over the next week, things escalated. First, she left another letter. This one warned of daily fines and claimed non-compliance would be noted in community reports. Jake shrugged. Get off. Then came the flyers. Printed in bold block letters. Who wants a graffiti wall in our neighborhood? A photo of Jake's fence zoomed in and edited to make the charcoal color look like soot. He found one taped to his garbage bin. Another was slipped under his doormat. A third fluttered in his front yard, weighed down by a rock. He kept his cool, at least on the outside. But inside, the frustration simmered. He didn't like being lied about. He didn't like the idea of someone walking onto his property when he wasn't home. And he really didn't like the look his next-door neighbor gave him when he waved good morning and got nothing but a glare in return. The kicker came on Thursday evening. He stepped out to grab his mail and froze. There was a for sale sign in his yard, not his sign. It was cheap, probably picked up from a hardware store with "Must Sell Terrible Neighbors" scribbled in Sharpie across the bottom. Jake ripped it from the ground, his hands shaking. Not from fear, but from something colder, sharper. That night he'd checked the footage on the security camera he'd installed 2 years ago but never really used. There she was, Karen. Just after midnight, walking briskly in from the sidewalk, placing the sign, taking a photo, then scurrying away like a raccoon with a stolen sandwich. Jake stared at the screen. Then he rewound, watched it again, and again. He didn't sleep much that night. Not because he was angry, but because something inside him had shifted. She thought this was over a fence. She had no idea what kind of neighbor she was messing with. Jake leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on. The video paused on the screen and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the beginning of a plan. The next week brought a strange, persistent quiet to the neighborhood, an eerie kind that settles right before a storm. Jake noticed it in the way people stopped making eye contact. Conversations hushed when he walked by. He wasn't sure if it was guilt or gossip, but something had changed. On Tuesday morning, as Jake walked out to grab his mail, he noticed another envelope. This one different from the last, thicker, neater. It wasn't hand-delivered this time, postmarked, legitimate-looking. His name typed cleanly on the front. Inside was a notice of non-compliance, stamped with an emblem that looked vaguely official, but wasn't. The letter claimed he owed $500 in accumulated fines for property code violations. It threatened liens, legal action, a court date if payment wasn't received within 7 business days. He read it twice, then a third time. His jaw tensed. He knew the HOA had no authority over him. He'd verified it with the city when he bought the property. But this wasn't just a letter. This was a campaign. Someone was orchestrating this, coordinating, and he already knew who. That night, he walked the perimeter of his property, checking every inch. He noticed small scuff marks on the gate latch, fresh ones where the paint had been rubbed off. His camera had been oddly angled downward, facing the dirt. He adjusted it back to its original position. The next morning, it was off again. She was getting bolder. Jake upgraded the cameras, set motion alerts to ping his phone. Then he waited. The next night, the alert chimed at 12:37 a.m. He opened the app and watched, live, as Karen crept across the side of his house with a flashlight. She wasn't even trying to hide. In one hand was a tape measure, the other a clipboard. She crouched along the edge of his lawn, scribbled something down, then turned and flashed a grin at the camera as if daring him to do something. He recorded, saved the footage to multiple backups, sent one to his cloud drive, another to a USB. By morning, he had a small digital library of her nighttime antics, trespassing, harassing, measuring imaginary violations. He took it all to the local precinct. The officer behind the desk glanced at the footage, nodded slowly, and said, "She's not technically breaking into your home, but yeah, that's trespassing. Repeated, too. We can log it. If you get a restraining order that might push her back a bit." Jake left with a case number, but not much else. Still, it was something. a marker, a paper trail. Then came the Facebook posts. Karen shared photos of Jake's yard, zoomed in, skewed to look worse than it was. One had a fallen branch labeled hazardous debris. Another focused on a section of chipped paint that she'd clearly scraped herself. She titled the post, "This is what happens when neighbors don't follow rules. We all suffer." The comments rolled in, some sympathetic, most mocking. Jake didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had a different plan, but he noticed something. Curious. Karen's path to the main street, the little gate between her yard and the sidewalk, cut directly through a narrow strip of land behind Jake's fence. It was small, barely noticeable, a sliver between his lot and the back of hers. He had assumed it was hers. Most people probably did, but he wasn't most people. He pulled up the city's zoning map, cross-referenced property lines. His eyes narrowed. That strip of land wasn't hers. It wasn't anyone's. It was city-owned, designated as utility easement, a technical gray area used for underground access, available for private purchase under special petition. Jake made a phone call, filled out paperwork, paid the filing fees. 3 weeks later, the deed arrived in the mail. The land was now his. He stepped outside and stared at the spot. Karen's gate, her prized path for morning dog walks and weekly garden tours, the only way she accessed the sidewalk without going through 2 other neighbors' yards. Now, legally, it was his backyard, and he knew exactly what he was going to do with it. That Saturday, he hired a local contractor. Nice guy, quiet, efficient. Together, they installed 8 feet of elegant vertical slatted cedar fencing. It stretched the full length of the new property line, perfectly flush with Jake's existing fence. Smooth, seamless. A keypad entry box was mounted beside the new gate. Karen's gate. By noon, the work was done. By 2, Jake was sipping a beer, on his back porch, waiting. It didn't take long. Karen's voice pierced the afternoon air. "What the hell is this?" Jake turned slowly, beer in hand. "New fence. You can't just block my gate," she snapped, stomping toward the barrier, like it had personally insulted her. "That's my access to the sidewalk. You're obstructing it." He took a long sip, then walked over to the fence, tapped the keypad. The gate clicked open smoothly. "Technically, Karen, that's no longer your access." She froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said calmly, pulling a folded document from his back pocket and holding it up, "I bought the land." Her face went through a rapid cycle of emotions, disbelief, confusion, then something bordering on panic. "You can't do that." "I did. Legally, it's public record. You should really keep up with those things." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Her visor sat slightly crooked now, knocked askew in her indignation. Jake turned back toward his porch. "If you'd like the code to the gate, you can file a formal request. I'll consider it. But I do charge a convenience fee." He didn't need to turn around to know she was still standing there, stunned. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the yard, Jake sat down again, legs crossed, beer halfway, finished. The fence stood tall behind him, a perfect line between chaos and peace, and for the first time in weeks the silence felt earned. But the best part? This wasn't the end. It was only the setup. Karen's retaliation came faster than Jake expected. By Monday morning, Jake's mailbox was overflowing again. Only this time, it wasn't just anonymous notices or fake fines. He found a stack of glossy pamphlets titled, "Protect Our Neighborhood. Stop the Tyranny," with his name and address printed right beneath a photo of the new gate. Karen had gone full propaganda. She accused him of privatizing public access, waging war on community freedom, and even endangering elderly residents by rerouting walking paths. The tone was dramatic, almost theatrical, as if Jake had dropped a moat around his yard and started charging tolls. He stared at the stack in disbelief, flipping through them with a kind of numb curiosity. Each one was more outrageous than the. His personal favorite included a photoshopped image of his fence catching fire with the caption, This is what happens when neighbors take control. Chaos. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh. Almost. But there was one thing Karen hadn't counted on. Her campaign was too loud, too public. And when you shout into a neighborhood loud enough, someone is bound to shout back. Jake wasn't the only one who'd had problems with her. Within a few days, neighbors began knocking on his door, quiet at first, almost ashamed. "I just want to say thank you," said Mr. Dillard from 3 houses down, who had been cited by Karen 3 years ago for leaving up Christmas lights until January 3rd. "She once tried to fine me for hanging a hammock," another neighbor whispered. "Said it looked bohemian and invited vagrants. Even Marcia, the neighborhood dog walker, dropped off a homemade casserole with a note that read, 'About time someone put her in her place.' The tide was turning, slowly, quietly. But definitely, Jake hadn't set out to start a rebellion. He just wanted his peace. But Karen had turned this into a spectacle. She forced everyone into a game, and now they were starting to root for the underdog. Still, she wasn't done. On Wednesday, Jake returned home to find a city inspector's truck parked out front. The man introduced himself politely, clipboard in hand, and said he was there on an anonymous tip. Something about an unpermitted structure and unauthorized fencing. Jake walked him through everything. The permits, the property line, purchase, even showed him the documentation he'd meticulously organized in a labeled binder. The inspector was impressed. "Most people don't do this level of homework," he said, flipping through the stamped documents. "Honestly, looks airtight." Karen watched from across the street, her arms folded, lips tight. She didn't wave when the inspector drove away with a nod of approval. Jake did. The next morning, she tried a different tactic. She parked her car across from his driveway, just enough to be legal, but close enough to feel invasive. She began blasting classical music from a portable speaker while gardening by the fence, which mostly involved passive-aggressively sweeping dust toward his yard. When Jake set out his trash, he found 3 of her petunias mysteriously flattened near the curb, and a note accusing him of vehicular plant slaughter. She was unraveling. Jake kept his cool, but he also began preparing the final phase of his plan. He called in a favor from a friend who worked in real estate law. Together, they combed through public records, digging deeper into Karen's property history. And that's when they struck gold. Karen had built a pergola on her back deck 5 years ago. Nice one, too, covered in ivy and fairy lights, the centerpiece of her backyard aesthetic. But it wasn't permitted. No inspection, no city approval. It extended 2 feet past the legal boundary, encroaching on green space designated for drainage. Jake didn't have to fabricate anything. He just had to report what was already true. He filed a complaint through the city's planning department. Anonymous, legal, undeniable. 3 days later, a city compliance officer knocked on Karen's door with a clipboard and a measuring wheel. Jake watched from his kitchen window as Karen argued, gestured, even pointed toward his house in what looked like a desperate attempt to shift blame. The officer barely reacted, simply jotted notes down and handed her a printed citation. The look on Karen's face, pure disbelief. Later that evening, Jake heard a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. Silence. No leaf blower, no sweeping, no muttered threats from across the fence. Just the quiet hum of crickets and the faint rustle of wind through the trees. He stepped outside, walking slowly toward the gate. And there she was, standing just beyond it, arms crossed, visor absent for the first time. Her hair was pulled back, her expression tired. "You win," she said, voice low. Bitter. Jake leaned against the fence post, arms folded. "This wasn't about winning, Karen. It was about you not stomping on people just because you don't like how they paint their fence." She didn't respond at first, then, almost too quiet to hear, "I just wanted things to stay how they were." Jake's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You mean how you controlled everything?" She looked away. "It felt better when I knew what to expect." "Well," he said, standing upright, "you're going to have to get used to surprises." Karen didn't reply. She turned and walked away slowly, her shoulders a little slumped. No visor, no clipboard, just a woman retreating into the quiet of her carefully curated house. Jake watched until her door closed behind her, and for the first time, he didn't feel angry. He just felt done. But one piece remained, one final touch. He walked inside, grabbed his laptop and uploaded a compilation video to a neighborhood group chat, The Gatekeeper, a Karen story. It was tasteful, factual, just enough clips to show her trespassing, measuring grass, placing the for sale sign, set to dramatic orchestral music with fade-ins and captions. It was live for less than an hour before it exploded with comments. By nightfall, someone had turned it into a meme. Jake didn't post a thing. He didn't have to. Justice had gone viral. 2 days later, Jake received an envelope in the mail, certified. Not another fake fine or neighborhood propaganda. This one was from the city. Inside was a notice. Karen's pergola was officially deemed non-compliant, and unless removed or brought up to code, she'd be facing daily fines until resolved. Jake read it once, then again, feeling a strange cocktail of satisfaction and solemnity. He wasn't the kind of guy who enjoyed someone else's pain, but this wasn't about pain. It was about balance, about teaching someone who'd built their life on controlling others that the rules applied to her too. Word spread fast. The neighborhood Facebook page, once a hive of HOA scolding and bake sale updates, was now ablaze with jokes, gifs, and sly references to the pergola plague. Someone posted a parody real estate listing, for sale, stunning backyard overreach. With built-in arrogance, sunlight not included. Karen didn't respond, she didn't post, didn't sweep. She just disappeared from view. Her perfectly coordinated seasonal flags no longer changed weekly. Her car, once religiously parked at the exact angle on her driveway, remained hidden behind closed garage doors. The neighborhood felt lighter, like the air itself had shed a layer of tension. But Jake wasn't done. She'd cost him sleep, time, energy, and tried to publicly smear him. His gate wasn't revenge, it was defense. But her actions, those deserved a reckoning that matched the scale of her pride. So he filed one final petition with the city. He wanted to install a decorative fence panel, a tasteful, artisan-style trellis just a few feet from the sidewalk. Something elegant. Symbolic. It wasn't cheap, but it didn't need to be. He was willing to pay the price for punctuation. Within days, the permit was approved. The contractor came back with materials, this time with neighbors waving from their porches, offering lemonade, baked goods, and thanks. The trellis was custom-made, reclaimed wood with wrought iron accents. Right in its center, etched in blackened steel, was a single phrase: "Respect grows where ego fails." It wasn't just a message, it was a monument. The installation took a day. Jake made a point not to look toward Karen's house while they worked, but when it was finished, he stood, back, hands on his hips, admiring the balance. His yard now told a story, from the cedar gate to the trellis. The next morning, he opened his door and paused. Karen stood outside the fence. No clipboard, no papers, just her and a Tupperware container in hand. Jake blinked. "You lost?" He gave a short, self-conscious smile. "You're funny." She held the container out. "Lemon squares. My grandmother's recipe." He didn't move. Karen sighed. "Look, I was out of line, okay? More than out of line. I was awful. I thought keeping order made me important, made the neighborhood better. But it didn't. Just made people hate me." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You think?" She laughed softly, genuinely this time. "Yeah, I deserved that." He took the lemon squares. Still warm. Still suspicious. "I saw the video," she said quietly. "Didn't think I could look that deranged. It was like watching a version of myself I didn't realize existed." Jake leaned on the gate. "That version made a lot of people miserable. No." She looked down. "I'm selling the house." That surprised him. He blinked. "Seriously?" She nodded. "It's time. I think I forgot what being a neighbor actually means. Thought it was about rules and control. Turns out it's more about boundaries, real ones." She looked up, eyes sincere. You reminded me. Jake studied her face. There was no deflection, no smugness, just weariness. Growth, maybe. The kind that came only after being knocked down by your own reflection. He gave a slow nod. I hope you find a place where you don't need a fence to feel in control. Karen smiled faintly. Me too. She started to turn, then paused. That quote, on your trellis. Yeah? It's good, Jake smirked. It's earned. She nodded again, then walked back to her house. Her steps slower, shoulders looser, almost human again. Jake closed the gate gently and brought the lemon squares inside. They were delicious. A week later, a for sale sign went up in Karen's yard. No theatrics this time, just a small, modest listing with no dramatic slogans or guilt-laced pamphlets. Neighbors came out to talk again. Gardens grew. Kids rode their bikes without glances over their shoulders. And Jake? Jake sat on his porch with a glass of iced tea watching the world go by behind the peace of his new fence. One evening, someone asked him if he'd ever consider running for the HOA board. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. No, he said, I think I'll just stay on this side of the gate. And for the first time since moving in, he knew, without a doubt, he belonged.